My name is Dr. Laura Seiberling, and this is a lecture on functional analysis procedures. A functional analysis, also known as an FA, involves experimental analysis to determine the function of a problem behavior. It's the only form of a functional behavior assessment that's going to allow you to confirm your hypothesis regarding a problem behavior and environmental event. Originally, it was pioneered by Iwata and colleagues in 1994, and subsequently has been published in hundreds of articles examining problem behavior in order to develop function-based interventions. In recent years, there have been more and more variations of functional analysis procedures in the literature, which I'm also going to describe. So the basic procedure of a functional analysis involves antecedents and consequences that represent those in the client's natural environment, and they are arranged so that you can examine their separate effects on problem behavior during your analysis. These are often described as analog conditions because they're implemented in a systematic fashion and not usually in the context of the client's natural routines or their natural environment, in order to allow the examiner to have better control over the environmental variables. Now, that being said, there have been functional analyses conducted in natural settings like homes and classrooms, as well as simulated settings. And researchers have actually found the results to be pretty similar and sometimes even better in the natural environment, especially if there are idiosyncratic variables that might be associated with the problem behavior. I'm going to talk a little bit about that towards the end of the lecture. Functional analyses are typically comprised of several test conditions and one control condition, which is known as your play condition. The typical test conditions involve contingent attention, contingent escape, alone, and often a contingent tangible condition as well. In your control condition, problem behavior is expected to be quite low because reinforcement's freely available and no demands are being placed. And while there are typical functional analysis procedures, it's important to understand that there is some flexibility that you have when you're designing and implementing these procedures, because you want to individualize it for your client depending on the presenting problem behaviors. So the important thing to understand is that each condition involves some sort of establishing operation and a potential source of reinforcement for the problem behavior. The conditions are presented one at a time and in an alternating sequence, and then you're going to be recording the level of the problem behavior in each session. Conditions are repeated in order to examine if the behavior occurs more frequently in one condition relative to the other conditions. So what do all these conditions look like? Well, like I said, the play condition is your control condition. You're going to have preferred activities that are continuously available to the client. Social attention is provided, no demands are placed. The problem behavior is ignored or it's neutrally redirected. So again, as I mentioned, your expectation is that the problem behavior is going to be quite low in the play condition, if indeed there are environmental variables that are associated with the problem behavior. In the contingent attention condition, the attention of the examiner or the person who's implementing the FA is diverted or withheld from the client. And when the problem behavior occurs, there may be a mild reprimand or some sort of soothing statement like, oh, don't hurt yourself, provided it's contingent upon the instance of the problem behavior. If you see elevated levels of the problem behavior in the contingent attention condition, there is support for the problem behavior being maintained by social positive reinforcement. In the contingent escape condition, task demands are delivered continuously using what's called a 3-step prompting procedure. Instructions to perform the task, modeling of how to perform the task, and then hand-over-hand assistance to the client to perform the task. A temporary break from the task is provided by removing the task materials and sometimes saying, oh, okay, we'll take a break, and terminating any sort of prompts to complete the task if the problem behavior occurs. And one thing I also want to mention is that it's usually a temporary break, so pretty brief. Depending on how long your analysis is, the break may be 30 seconds, 1 minute before then the task demand is reinstated. If you see elevated levels of the problem behavior in the contingent escape condition, then this will suggest that the behavior is being maintained by negative reinforcement. In a contingent tangible condition, the client is first given access to preferred activities or toys, and then that preferred activity is removed, and less preferred or neutral items are available along with adult attention. However, if the problem behavior occurs, the preferred activity is then returned to the individual temporarily, again, for maybe 30 seconds to 1 minute. And if you see elevated levels of the behavior in this condition, it's going to suggest that the behavior is maintained by positive reinforcement through access to tangible items. In the alone condition, you have a low level of environmental stimuli present. So the therapist and task and play materials are absent, and the problem behavior is ignored or neutrally redirected. And this is going to help you identify if the behavior appears to be maintained by automatic reinforcement. It is possible that when you're interpreting the results, you see that the problem behavior is elevated in multiple conditions. So the problem behavior could be maintained by multiple sources of reinforcement. However, if the behavior occurs at similar levels across all of your conditions, then the results are inconclusive, and they're often described as undifferentiated. And this can be indicative of this can also be indicative of automatic reinforcement. So there are some advantages and limitations of a functional analysis. The big advantage is that it's going to allow you to demonstrate clear variables that are influencing the occurrence of the problem behavior, more so than if you used other descriptive or indirect methods of functional assessment. But there are a host of limitations to FA procedures. So it's important to be mindful of these as you're considering the use of an FA and which type of FA procedure you want to implement. First, the approach may temporarily strengthen or increase the problem behavior to an unacceptable level. And because you are implementing various conditions, the behavior may even acquire new functions. And also, some practitioners have expressed concerns about the use of FA procedures and the acceptability of those procedures. So it may be that there is apprehension to use these types of procedures due to the practitioner's understanding of its purpose, or also the level of training that it requires in order to implement an FA procedure. Also, some behaviors may not be well suited for analyses due to the setting or some other factors.
Tilly, what's wrong?
First, a behavior may be very dangerous, and you may not be able to ensure that there's proper safety equipment or training of the person implementing the FA to ensure that the client is going to be safe, or the safety of the individuals who are participating in the analysis. Also, some behaviors are dangerous or severe problem behaviors, but they occur very infrequently, and so they may be unlikely to occur during your FA procedure. There is also some times when a functional analysis that's conducted in a contrived setting isn't going to detect some of the variables that might be associated with the problem behavior in the natural environment. This is especially the case if there are some idiosyncratic variables, such as like another student's presence, or a noise in the natural environment that tends to coincide with the problem behavior, and that those stimuli are not provided in the FA condition in a simulated setting or in a clinical setting. Lastly, FAs do require a lot of time, effort, and expertise to properly conduct and interpret the analysis. So the limitations that have been stated have really led to some enhanced FA procedures, as well as some variations of FA procedures, such as brief functional analyses, conducting FAs in natural settings, trial-based functional analyses, synthesized functional analyses, latency-based functional analyses, and functional analyses of precursor behavior. I'm going to describe each of these now. So a brief functional analysis. This is often considered when there are some time constraints of a functional analysis or the severity of the problem behavior is a major concern. So this involves just having 1 or 2 brief 5 to 10 minute sessions for each condition. And shortening your sessions and having fewer sessions may still reveal a clear behavioral function, but researchers have found that it does so in fewer cases than if a typical functional analysis is implemented with repeated implementation of each of the conditions. You also can consider conducting an FA in the natural environment. So most functional analyses tend to be conducted in clinical settings because examiners are able to have a lot of control over the environmental variables being manipulated. But in the natural environment, you are now in the environment with all the relevant stimulus cues that may be present and that might not be present in the clinical setting. So it will require some additional supervision for others in the natural environment, especially if you're in like a classroom setting. And if you have, a teacher or a caregiver who's participating in the analysis, but you may find that you are going to be able to capture some of these other variables that are associated with the problem behavior that you wouldn't be able to capture in an analog or a clinical setting. There are also trial-based functional analyses, and these involve a series of trials that are typically interspersed across activities throughout the day. So each trial will last 1 minute, very brief, and it'll involve 2 components. One component is going to consist of whatever your presenting EO is for that condition, or your establishing operation for that condition, and the contingency for the problem behavior. So you may have a demand, which is the establishing operation, which is then followed by the removal of the demand contingent upon the problem behavior. In the second component, which is your control condition, it's going to involve continuous access to the reinforcer. So in this demand situation, it would be just having your task break that's being continuously provided. The conditions are implemented when they would just naturally occur in the environment, which may be more feasible to implement compared to some other functional analysis procedures. Another functional analysis variation that I want to discuss that has been a hot topic in our field over the last several years is something called synthesized functional analyses. And this is often described as what's called an interview-informed synthesized contingency analysis that was developed by Dr. Greg Hanley and colleagues. It includes a test condition, and how it really differs from the other FA procedures is that you can implement multiple contingencies simultaneously, such as attention and escape,